Hello, everybody. I got a special request from a buddy of mine at Reliable Building Solutions. Little shout out to Sean. If you guys need any projects built in with top quality down by the Olympia, Washington area, give Sean a call. Reliable Building Solutions. Anyway, he asked me, he was having some challenges with an engineer and finding one that's reasonable to work with and um, not overworked. So right now in Puget Sound area, it's pretty hard to get engineers, at least get their attention. So I'm going to make this video specifically for finding an engineer and how to work with them, and architects as well, and why you would need them. So let's get right to it. I'm going to share my screen, and here we go. All right. On the screen, you'll see I did a search for, here on this screen, I did a search for consultant engineers near me. I use consultant engineers because I seem to get uh, better resource or better results. So I'll scooch around, take a look, and I've worked with a few of these folks. So in the past, I've worked with, sorry, it's getting in the way. I worked with Kaufman Engineers. I've worked with CPL. They're in there somewhere. Stantec Nordorfer, worked with them. So these are a few that I know of. I know they're quite busy, but they're pretty large firms. So you end up just calling them as best you can. Most of the time, I will go to some architectural engineering conferences that are typically held at the Columbia Tower. Really neat place to go. It's a great venue. You get up there at the top of the tower and you get to look around. So anyhow, so I go typically right to here and I'll jump on Kaufman Porter, pull them up real quick, go to their website. So these guys are awesome. I've worked with them. They've helped me out on even small jobs, which is pretty unusual, but they were interested to just see what we had and worked it out. So it was nice. So essentially, you make a phone call. It's a nice cold call. Say, hey, this is what I got going on. I need a structural engineer to be involved. They typically like to have an architect, working through an architect. So depending on what your needs are, it might be to your benefit to hire an architect because the architect will take a look at the current codes, compare them to what your design is, and then they'll draw up what, in order for you to get permits, number one, you really need to have an architect because you got to get um, all the information about the site on page one, the general information. So there's room for an architect. So get them in there. Once you get the architect will come out, do some sketches, send that, they will send it to the engineer and work it out. That seems to be the best way to do it, and everybody seems very comfortable with it. It's very traditional. That's one of the faster ways to get your hands on an engineer because an architect has a pool of engineers that they've worked with. On the other hand, I worked directly with Coughlin, Porter, and Lundin, and I designed all the documents on SketchUp and layout. Okay, so it can be done, not a problem, but you have to describe to your engineer exactly what you want. So the engineer, number one, doesn't necessarily want to choose materials, doesn't want to get involved in the design from the uh, aesthetic side of it. They want to do structures, functioning, tie-ins. That's about it. And that's what they're good at, and that's what they want to do. They do not want to chase down getting permits. And so you have to accept that as part of your relationship with them if you're going to go directly with them. So with CPL, I essentially did all the paperwork related to that. There was some back and forth with the drawings. It costs a bit of money. It's fine. It's not ridiculous. It's in fact very reasonable, even with a large firm like that. It was quite reasonable. So it's worth the money. Once they'll give you their shops, or not their shops, they'll give you their structural drawings and they'll give you their calculations. You combine these two, put them under a cover sheet with the general information and project information and all that that's required to go to the building department, and you send that in. If you want it to go fast, you have to walk it through, and sometimes that doesn't matter, depending on what place you're at. Seattle right now just doesn't care one way or the other. It's going to take what it takes. Usually 6 months even. So that's how you get it started. Working with engineers. So once it's on paper, the challenge here is most engineers will visit the site once. That's probably all they need, and then they rely on the folks out in the field, usually superintendent, general foreman, that type of guy or girl that does all the field measurements, tries to figure out the constructability, what's in conflict, what other problems they have. And then by RFI, request for information or request for interpretation, whichever way you want to do it. You cut and paste the detail that you want the engineer to look at, and you describe what you need done. And a lot of times I use illustrations. So, for example, I have to surface mount an I-beam that's 34 feet tall. There's some power that I cannot remove, relocate, or do anything with. It's a surface mounted conduit. It's going to affect where I put my beams. But I send an RFI to the engineer and I say I need to notch out the beam right here where the electrical is so that I can set the beam to the wall. And they respond back with an answer to your RFI. You can, but add this, or it's okay to do 6 inches of notching, 2 inches deep. Add another mounting hole here, and boom, you're good to go. All right, so that's how you communicate. Most of the time, they don't like to do over the phone. They will, but they don't like to do over the phone for stuff like this. It costs them money and time. So it's better just to send an email, give them a chance to read it with an RFI in it, and they can respond right to the RFI, and it will be simple. In more complex cases, I'm working with an engineer right now on a strengthening project for a wood system. It's an existing glulam building, glulam frame, and it's not strong enough to do what it needs to do for the new purpose of the building. So we have to take smaller beams. They're called LVL. It's it's essentially just a large 2 by. It's technically it's a 2 by 16, but they get married. We call it sistering to each side of the glulam. Now, this building's occupied and has a lot going on inside it, and we have to figure out other ways of doing it where we can't remove the air conditioning systems and all the fire suppression systems and everything else that's up in the ceiling where these beams have to go and be strengthened. So we come up with alternative solutions. Yes, it's aggravating to the engineer to have done all this work and then have a constructability study come back and say, can't be done in this area, please consider doing this. And they have to do some more calculations. And once the calculation's done, they give you a few more drawings. And it is a massage, but once you get that massage over, it's pretty good. You still have to go take all the changes to the building department, make sure that they're cool with it, get your third-party inspector, the new sheets and that type of thing. So there's a lot of coordination when it comes to that type of constructability. Um, there, there are a few folks that I've worked with that, well, they have social shortcomings. So either they're egotistical and everything they do is perfect. Those guys are very difficult to work with. And if you have a choice, you should find someone else. If you don't have a choice, it's going to be difficult because essentially it's their license on the line. You have to build it the way they show you how to build it or the way they've drawn it. And if they don't give you any leeway, you build it the way they drew it, and it's on them if it collapses. Okay, or if there's any other problems. And not that you want to do that. So you're always annotating and sending your emails. This is not the right way to do it. This is going to cause problems here. This could potentially cause problems here, and have it constantly in that email. And an egotistical guy will say, just do it the way I tell you to do it. And that's fine. Make sure that the owner of the project is involved, because most of the time the engineer and architect work directly as prime to the owner. And we, as a GCGM, with the exception of design build, work prime to the owner and collaterally cooperate with the architects and engineers. So there's a bit of a challenge there. The more often nowadays, the design build firms roll the architects and engineers into in-house, or they have a subcontract with an architect engineering firm, and they work directly with the owner. And what that does is it does eliminate a lot of the ego. It eliminates the people you can't work with. So if there's someone who is um, very socially challenged, but intellectually valuable, smart, and communicates well in an engineering environment, but poorly in a construction environment, it's a problem because there's a communication gap. And very often that doesn't work out well for anybody. So in cases like that, where you appreciate what the engineer and architect are bringing to the table, sometimes it makes sense to bring in or to introduce a third party that can act between you, and more or less to help interpret both ways, and try to lay out what's important and try to bridge that gap of communication. Um, there's folks out there that specialize in doing just that. So if you get into that situation, that's what I would recommend. Um, I'm not sure what else I could tell you about interacting with engineers and architects. Otherwise, when it comes to the administrative side, paying them and receiving services and submittals and things like that, it's more or less just a typical administrative uh, exercise that you would do with any sub or any other consultant. Let's move on to inspection firms. So any more often nowadays, the building departments of these communities, especially smaller communities, although even Seattle, a large city, is going to third-party inspectors. So it saves them on having to train and certify all their in-house inspectors. So there's firms out there that very specifically do field inspections. And those are actually very easy to work with. It's very similar to calling up any type of service provider and saying, I need this service at this location at this time. Here's our application. They fill it out. You fill it out. It's submitted, and it's either by purchase order or by direct cost invoicing. So that's a simple thing. They do provide reports and they do refer to your permit. And then what'll happen is you take those reports and you submit them to the city, to the inspection portal. And that way they have it for their records. And once all the reports are in, the city will come out and do a final inspection, look at all the reports, stamp it, sign it, and close the permit out. It's that simple. So I'm pretty happy with the inspection engineers and those types of folks. So they've got it down pretty easy. I don't. The only time I have trouble with them is the there's a there's a gap of understanding from year to year as codes change and tolerances change, and depending on where you're at in the United States or elsewhere, it can get pretty sticky whether you have seismic upgrades or seismic requirements or not, and to what level the seismic requirements are. And so when you're working with individual inspectors from other third party, sometimes they are transplants from other areas. And when they come here, they're doing their first or second inspections in a seismic region. And they're overzealous and don't understand that there are some deviations that have to happen. And it's fine that we write it all up as long as it's written properly. Yeah, I think just getting past a couple of the little nuances on certain inspectors it's it's really not that big of a deal, but it is something that will irritate you a bit when you're getting inspected. The thing it all comes down to this. You want to have compliance um, reports. If it's out of compliance, not good. You have to describe the reason and fix it. And if you can't fix it, you have to describe why and then get your engineer of record to give you alternatives that you can provide using an RFI that you can provide to the third party inspector so that they can write down that they received it and it's okay. And once that happens, there is not an issue. The city is very happy with that. So I've experienced that quite a bit. Um, I think that's probably about as deep as I go. If you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to me at Mark at buildersflux.com. And yeah, so good luck.